Welcome to Start By Listening, the podcast about sexual harm and trauma.
We are centered on educating and empowering our Western Kentucky communities.
Our goal is to transform the way we talk about sexual harm and trauma.
Transformation begins by listening to understand.
We talk so you can listen today and change the world tomorrow. Welcome back to Start By Listening. This is part 2 of a podcast that we started a few weeks ago, Raising Sexual Offenders. I think that was the name of it, y'all. Honestly, I don't remember. I'm authentic. I don't know if I took my medicine today. It is 2022. Oh, well. Hey, everybody. It's Jennifer, a.k.a. the Friendly Therapist, here with my PIC and co-pilot, Shelby.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back.
And we have some lovely people here with us again today. We have Miss Becky Roby, Miss Crystal Newton, and Miss Gann, our experts here at New Beginnings on all things sexual offending and sexual offenders due to where they used to work before they came to New Beginnings. And so we asked them to join us again for part 2 because part 1 was just too damn short. And we have lots of interesting things to cover. I guess for a recap, and I'm going to ask anybody to chime in and help me, but kind of where we left off with part 1 was we were kind of talking about along the lines of having unrestricted access to the internet, to social media, opens this opportunity to be exposed to pornography and really adult content that children have access to now, which creates this dynamic and this opportunity for kind of the pathophysiology to develop of offending and what's the word I'm looking for? Pushing boundaries, manipulation, aka grooming, which we talked about. Gosh, wasn't that like season 2, Becky, that you and I talked about manipulation and grooming? And so that's kind of where we are. And I'm so glad we're all back. So I don't know, where you guys want to go today on this journey? What you thinking?
I think that was an excellent recap. And Becky, you're about to hop in. I was going to ask you, honestly, what do we do about it? How do we stop it?
Well, when Jennifer is doing the recap, I'm just thinking things in my head like lack of supervision. One of the big things too from the last podcast that hits home internally when I'm thinking about it is the reactions in the body to stimuli that's produced at a younger age, sexual stimuli, and that person, like that kid's response to it. So we talked about like a kid who had was being pantsed. Was that, Tara, the example that we gave? I think you were in that training. And there was the giggling, and then it kept happening, and then it became for attention. And then this particular offender kind of talked about what that feeling meant to him, and then how it escalated to sexual with his pushing the boundaries. Like, this time I'm going to show my front privates instead of mooning that person. And then the responses that I got and the excitement that came with that, which squirrel, it makes me think about Atlas of the Heart. Jennifer, do you remember when Brene was talking about how our body reacts to excitement and anxiety and fear? And so it all depends on the person. And I think, Crystal, we talked about this too in supervision. It talks about the person's disposition. So how we can think of like my kid went to a fire department today and toured it, and how he was excited. And we talked about body sensations. And another kiddo could be anxious, even though they are uncertain that the feelings are so closely related. It has to do with how you internally, that feeling lands on you, disposition of family, reactions, feelings, identifications. That's crazy. So when we talk about a kid mooning and exposing themselves, and then maybe it was, a little bit of like anxiety? Are people going to accept me? They think this is funny. Oh, this is excitement. And then it can transition to other feelings. Sorry. Just going to go off on a tangent of random things and pile them together in this.
I love it.
Little ball sexual offending.
I love it. And it's true because within the nervous system, excitement, fear, and anxiety, they all create almost the exact same physical sensations within the body. And so then it's kind of like, well, what's the context of the situation to help us figure out, because like I love to talk in front of people. I did theater in high school. I love doing trainings, and it's exciting to me. And it's also a little nervous at the same time, a little bit of anxiety, because it's like, oh, who are these people going to be? Are they going to receive what I'm giving? And so sometimes it's both, and it's being able to have that context. But when we're kids, right, we don't always have words to put context to a situation.
Or information. So I'm not going to, this is not a client that I'm going to talk about. It's actually somebody who's not a offender, but talking to another person about their sexuality and how when they were younger, they had no idea what to be attracted to as far as a woman. And so they had a poster of Kathy Ireland, and they would look at it and get sexually aroused by the armpits, because most women's armpits are covered a lot of times. And this person had no idea what to focus on because they were so young that they had no idea what was under the bathing suit, right? The bottom part anyway. So I would imagine that's kind of where fetishes start in young kids. And it blew my mind away because I'd never heard of anybody talk about their sexuality that way, and remembering when they were a kid and what happened. And this person had some sexual abuse, but if you don't know, you don't know. And so there's all kinds of things that could get mixed up in your head as far as sexuality and excitement and what you get turned on by and what gets you off, for a better word. But there's no telling what's in people's minds before they even know anything as kids.
So it's really interesting you bring up armpits, because I just saw on TikTok that there has been a crabs outbreak at Brigham Young University. And that crabs outbreak is happening in armpits because that is what those students are doing to get around the loophole of not being allowed to have premarital sex. I saw it on TikTok, so give it what it's worth. Is it real or not? But yeah, no, I just saw that. So the armpit thing is interesting. But
getting around what loophole?
They're not allowed to have premarital sex. So have you heard about soaking, where they just kind of like lay there and then someone will shake the bed because they're not allowed to do any thrusting motions? But if it's just sitting there, it's not technically premarital sex. So it's okay in the eyes of, they don't worship a god in Mormonism. Or do they have a specific god? It's like a branch of Christianity. I don't know, but that's their loophole to get out of premarital sex. And now there is a crabs outbreak in the armpits of students there because they're doing something with the armpits.
Am I hearing you saying that?
Yes, you are.
Whatever orifice, whatever partner, there is insertion of private parts, if applicable. And then someone is causing the gyration and movement to happen.
That's what soaking, yes. There's an entire, yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Is that considered a threesome?
No, probably not with them, I would imagine. No.
I'm just asking because you have to have somebody moving the bed.
I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like, what is the bystander, I guess, so-called bystander?
Oh,
I think technically you could say that, but I don't think that that's what they would call it within
their actions. The restrictions, it just shows you that the restrictions cause, I'm not going to say this deviant sex because I don't think it's deviant, but it is still sex, but they're able to do some kind of mind gymnastics.
I'm almost thinking like think outside the box. Like how can I do like think outside the box in order to feel this sensation? Yeah.
How can I get what I want without breaking the law? How can I get what I want without breaking the ethics and the moral police?
Which shows that sex is just part of being a human being. And when you're restricted, it makes you want it even more, almost. I mean, especially kids, teenagers.
Well, that's taboo. It's anything, right? Like if your friends are all on YouTube and you're the one student whose parents are like lockdown central and like, no, you can't be on YouTube, or if you are, I'm the one who's controlling. What are you going to do? You want to know what am I missing? What am I missing?
Yeah, and they're not telling. They're not educating you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's where things get dangerous. And then you start building those weird neural pathways into the deviant behaviors. And I'm glad that you brought that up, Crystal, because that reminds me, during the last episode, I did bring up where does the deviation between like kink and horrible things happen. Like obviously it's with a consensual partner, and there's people who are in the BDSM community who have very clear, strict guidelines, but there are some really deeply, some may view as disturbing fetishes out there. So obviously you need the consensual partner, but like at what point is that deviant behavior like deviant in a destructive way? Does that make sense? I mean, I know where I'm going, but I want to hear your input and into that kind of realm of growing up and how those pathways are built. And
well, here's the thing: kids are starting out with kink right off. I mean, they know about all this stuff, and it's not like, oh, I'm 48 years old, or no, I'm 40 years old and I'm divorced and I'm learning about all this stuff. That's not a sad story, but it's a personal story. But yeah, it's so accessible that they are starting with kink, like little daddy little girl relationships. I had a client that was involved in I forgot what she called it, but it wasn't daddy little girl, but it was sub dom relationship. Like kids are doing those things today.
Oh yeah, I had a 5th grader explain to me what furry is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting there going like this, and I thought, I need to look that up because I really don't think if I know.
I actually had a child recently tell me that their sister was going as a furry for Halloween, and I was like, do you know what that is? I mean, I asked her, like what kind of animal was she going as? Because I don't know if this child understood actually what a furry was, but I don't know. I
think furries can be sexual.
Go ahead, Crystal. Sorry.
I think furries can be sexual and non-sexual.
Really?
But yeah, and I
thought
think
it was like a strictly kink thing.
No, but it's like bronies. That wasn't a sexual thing either until adults started getting involved. And I think that furries can also be non-sexual, because I think it's just people relating to an animal or the animorph that we see so much. And then if you go back to childhood and the TV shows you watched and you got attracted by Lola Bunny, you were attracted to her. This is also part of the fetish and the kink too, I think, is becoming attractive. Like this person I was talking about became attracted to armpits because those are, or like places where aren't seen with the clothes, like maybe your belly or, and then these kids get infatuated with anamorphic characters, sexually attracted to them.
And then are identifying as animals at school and requesting.
And I think that's where...
That is not true, Becky. Don't bring up the litter box thing. That is fake news, right-wing propaganda.
Yeah, I think some of that is
I'm
not
actually
true.
Internally giggling because I know that that's not true.
Okay, good.
Can you not just sprinkle it in?
But
they do like to wear cat things. Like, yeah.
But I also think that's where, like, the younger generation, like I sit here and think this is what we do every single day. and the lack of education or the new stuff that comes out that I'm unaware of. So then I think of like older generations, like people who are even older than me, and you have these kids who don't really, they're saying these things, but they're not going to go to their parents because their parents are old and don't understand. And then where do the parents get the information? And then it's like, I have these questions or these things. And so I deal with it on my own. And how easy does it cross to then it's unsafe? So how do I channel this new thing? How do I channel it in a safe way? Like we talk about consent, like of course you have to have a consensual partner, but also how do I channel it as that individual in a safe, productive, healthy way? You know, especially when we talk about masturbation, of course we tell people like, as long as you're in a safe place, you're in private, you're in a bathroom, you're in your bedroom, nobody's going to walk in. But how do they then take these things like we're talking about and channel it in a safe, healthy way when you can't really disguise some of this stuff like you can masturbation, so to speak? You know, if you're dressing this way or if you have this fetish or you have this, you can't really disguise it in that way. And then who do you talk to?
That's a great question. I think that's the question I was trying to ask. You worded that very, very well.
Well, and we sexualize children and everything dealing with candy. We sexualize candies, we sexualize cartoons like Lola Bunny. Well, you know, do bunnies have boobs? I mean, no. So I think that's part of it too. Just everything's sexualized. And
then perpetrators don't want to go talk about it because then what? They get in trouble. They get, you know, you're weird, you're a weirdo, get away from me. So what happens to their behaviors? They don't go away. They just increase or.
Which, when you said that, like, I understand that the topic of this is like, you know, raising sexual offenders, but I can't help but just have this parallel correlation, sexual offending and the serial killers who sexually offend as well. Right? Like, what kind of environment, what kind of lack of needs being met? Because
what kind of brain structure when you're born?
I mean,
to me, I've always felt like it's more about brain structure. Like this is just something, we are sexual people. We're humans, we're sexual people. And you can't help who you're attracted to. Like this is the gender, this is what turns me on. Like sometimes that's just who makes you that person. And I think
you can't help who you're attracted to.
Well, you know what I mean? Like
conditioned, like Crystal's talking about, even when we're talking about furries, there can definitely be conditioning 100% of who you're attracted to.
You can be, but I think like for some offenders, like they're just attracted to kids. You know what I mean? Like they are
easy sex.
Yeah.
Sex and people you can control, manipulate. You want sex that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you think about all these things, and Shelby, you brought up like, where's the line? There's so many variables because when you think about sub and doms, my brain goes to, or individuals who like NAMBLA, when we talk about the science behind it and the behavioral reasons behind it in terms of like emotional maturity, afraid of rejection, wanting to be told what to do because they're a fear of making mistakes. There's then we talk about
rape.
What is it?
Consensual rape scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about being raised and what you were provided, what you weren't provided emotionally, how you feel that need and void. I mean, I could be 100% wrong, but I'm going to dare to say more percentage than not of the sexual kinks are not healthy.
I'm a disagree.
No, okay. Well, I meant in terms of, is it a healthy person with another person who knows their boundaries, who aren't involving other people? There is absolute present and mindfulness in the moment. There is no regrets. There is no flashbacks related to it. It doesn't cause any issues in any other my relationships.
Well, there's not a lot of things that don't do that. I mean, I think it is a very dangerous place to be, because just like manipulative people become therapists, or manipulative people become cops, or whatever, in every field, you have dangerous people in the kink in area world that are only after their own needs. So yeah, but I think when it's there are communities in certain places that have sex clubs in their communities. These communities are ran very safe. They're ran very consensual. They have classes, and people get kicked out if they do not behave well. So those places, yes. On the internet and just meeting at the bar type things, no. But I think it can happen.
But even in these sex clubs, it's not like they do this full assessment of, tell me about your history of trauma. Do you feel like you can say no verbally? Do you need a passcode? Can we use an object instead? Like, do you think that there's this full psychosocial assessment?
No, I don't know about that, but they do educational courses about it. And I mean, at the end of the day, you're an adult and you're here, and you've got to, this is the facilities that you use. And I mean, they're not responsible for your mental health, but I do think they care about mental health. But that's not everywhere. That's
right.
At places I've been myself to observe.
Like, I'm sitting here thinking, like, when you talk about like preconditioned or your brain development and different things like that, like, do you guys, and I mean, this is an honest question, like, do you guys think that you can prevent somebody becoming a sex offender? Do you think a parent? Do you think, how do you prevent that? Or do you think that
education?
But if there's brain structure, like, they've been able to determine if somebody has the ability to become a psychopath based on brain scans, because those brain scans look a certain way. So that's a brain structure, right? So I don't know.
Google EEGs and
and then like to prevent it, because your personality is formed by a certain age. When do you prevent it? What do you do? You know what I mean? Like, how do you, because here's the thing, here's what I always think, and this is what I tell a lot of my clients, like, sex isn't dinner talk. Like, this isn't what we sit around and talk about at the dinner table. And, we have this stigma attached to it. So how do you prevent it if society says this isn't something for you to really talk about it? And then really no parent wants to talk to a 4, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, and then as we're getting 6 and 7, we're just closer to our personalities being developed. And at that point, when is there no turning back, so to speak, or going back?
I mean, if you're born with it and you don't have any sexual abuse or anything happen to you, you make sex dinner talk. That's how you prevent it, in my opinion.
Guys, there is quantitative EEG studies on pedophilia and sex offenders showing significant altercations, specifically over the left hemisphere and regions. So there's research data on that.
Does it say anything about fixated pedophiles? The ones that are, or does it just lump them all in the whole?
There is multiple studies, so I'm wondering if you could filter out just on that.
Yeah.
How do we prevent?
Well, okay, wait a minute. Raise a hand if you've ever had a parent ask you, is my child going to grow up and be a sex offender?
Does everyone?
I haven't talked to enough parents yet.
Every kid that's sexually abused become a sex offender? No.
But that is a fear, right? There is this undercurrent fear of, oh my gosh, now that my child has been hurt, their boundaries have been violated, pushed. How do I know that they're not going to do that to someone else?
I've also heard of the mother who gets impregnated by her rapist and then has the baby, and it's a male, and is he going to be a rapist like his dad? Yep.
I will also say in those situations where I have been asked, I feel like a lot of the times it is the perpetrator, the adult perpetrator, who has had two children do things together. And maybe there was an age gap between them. And then people look at the one that's the oldest and were they a perpetrator too? Because they went along with this. So there was that question of, is this child now a perpetrator because he was doing these things to the younger one?
Oh, yeah. And that's a fear. I mean, I've had a kid ask me before, does this mean I'm going to hurt somebody else? You know?
And what a great talking point. Like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about your feelings. Let's talk about, because that's how you discuss empathy. How did it make you feel? How do you think it would make others feel? Is this a worry or is it something that you're fantasizing about? Let's talk about it. Like Crystal said, like, let's make this dinner talk. There's no judgment. Exploration. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, you leave boys' parts are on the outside, so they figure it out at some point. But even for girls and learning about masturbation and learning how to please themselves and not dependent upon another partner because our bodies are so different, that's not happening. And you're left out there to just figure it out on your own. And that's an awkward conversation to have, but wouldn't you like
Little glitchy glitch.
information said learn it on your own and maybe not have it.
Because some parents, of course, this is so being talked about right now. I'm thinking of Jeffrey Dahmer, because it was so addressed and talked about. Like, the parents knew he didn't really have a lot of empathy. So what do you do as a parent when you recognize your child doesn't have empathy, but you don't realize that the lack of empathy can then go to this type of behavior, whether it be a perpetrator or, a person who commits these crimes, and you just think like, oh, my child is closed off, and they miss the boat on trying to teach empathy at that age because they don't recognize the correlation of, no, this could lead to greater things. It's not just the child who doesn't like to discuss feelings.
I mean, you can learn empathy. It's taught. You can absolutely learn empathy. However, we're talking about the brain, and what if it is an organic thing that this particular person it's not accessible.
So a lot of the materials that I read while I was being trained into this position, obviously I'm not an expert, but it's always children who offend on other children won't necessarily grow up to be adult offenders, but is that because they were caught and taught empathy and then went through treatment and that their brain is still in that pattern that they could offend in adulthood? Or were they just curious because they didn't understand and they were exposed to something? Like, what makes that child perpetrator a continued perpetrator versus a unknowing exposed to the wrong things?
Sometimes I think it is empathy. I think honestly, there are kids who are like, I feel so bad. I was exploring. And then you have the other kids who are just like, I think there's a big piece to that.
I knew it felt, I didn't know it wasn't wrong until I was taught it was wrong. And then when I was educated about it, then I thought I had to do it.
I felt shame or embarrassment or.
So with working with offenders, because you both y'all worked with offenders, did you work with youth offenders too? And could you notice that shift? Were they not recommended for treatment if they showed empathy? Or
do I feel like there were definitely more kids than not when working with them where you thought, oh shit, the work's being done and they'll hit the radar when they're 18 and then they offend?
Unfortunately.
And then
I hate to say that. I didn't want to say it, but we can be a lot of them high chance of reoffending.
Did you ever have any that just had such a low IQ? And then it's like, wow. And they're like, oh, okay. I mean, I've had a couple of those.
You mean in terms of their
before,
concrete
but
level, and when you say no, then they understand and then they don't do it anymore?
yeah.
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 Or
Yes.
rechanneling the sexual energy into a different capacity, a safe,
Yeah.
healthy way. Shelby, I think it also matters too when I think about the kids that you worked with, what home they were going to, what's the support system like? We've talked about it before, opportunities. Are they going to continue outpatient therapy? Those thoughts aren't going to stop. So
And then you think like a kid lies to get out of trouble. Like we don't want to get into trouble. So we usually tell lies to get out of trouble. So you think about a kid who's already been caught, been sent off to treatment for a year. And then they go back home and these thoughts start coming in their head. Why would they tell?
And I got to
I just got sent off for a year. I just got all this stuff and I was supposed to, be cured because I got sent off and went to this treatment. Why would I tell if these intrusive thoughts are popping in my head again?
And now I'm a failure.
What we encourage.
Yeah.
We encourage them to talk about the intrusive thoughts. We encourage them to label them, talk about them. Who's your safe space? I didn't work on I was not a therapist when I worked with offenders like Tara and Crystal were. I was a youth care worker, but still working. I was getting my master's. So those thoughts are popping in my head. I'm watching, I'm sitting in group, I'm noticing these things. I'm reading the materials that they're working with, but I do want to just put that on the record. Like I haven't done therapy with a juvenile who's had sex offenses.
So what I'm hearing from everyone throughout the course of this conversation is it's really a nature, this is a nature thing. It's not partially a nurture thing, but it's mostly just ingrained in your bed. It's a little bit of both, but
there's no black and white
there
with it, Shelby. So I love some of the questions you're asking, and there's so many variables with so many of them that you can't give a specific.
Everyone is different.
Yeah.
Everyone, every single one. And going back to the parent stuff where we were saying, who do they go home to? You're going to send them home with parents who still don't want to talk about sex, are still pissed that they did what they did, or still, thinks shaming and guilting is the best parenting way. You're going to make a super sex offender.
And some people think like, I went to treatment, I'm cured. I mean, think about substance abuse. I went to rehab. Oh, I did my stay at rehab, and it's people don't see it as ongoing. A lot of the times that's where the ball is dropped. They don't see it as ongoing. Like this is an ongoing thing you have to stick with and continue to constantly practice. Like I have kids who have perpetrator issues, but it's constant like, oh, come here, give me a hug. Come here, give me this, and the people they encounter in the community who do that, who have no idea. And it's a constant, it's never ongoing. It's like, oh, they're in therapy, they went to treatment, and then there's no ongoing follow-up.
And I'll go.
Because could you imagine as a parent, your kid coming home from this type of treatment, and then you're having to go around and educate teachers and like caretakers and their friends' parents and friends. If my kid does this and they need to ask permission before they give a hug, or they need to set, this far away from somebody, like you would constantly be educating somebody and think of the stigma.
Yeah. But the first step is we should all be teaching our kids to do all of that.
Yes.
Their body's their body. And we wouldn't have to worry about that if parents taught their kids these things.
I think something important to also add to this, if we're talking about raising sexual offenders, and you all have mentioned a couple of times of when they come back home, right, from treatment. So what kind of message does that send to the victim/survivor when the person who hurt them is now allowed back in the home?
When the parents are dying for them to get home.
You mean like if it's a sibling or someone that lives in the home with them? Oh, girl. It's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
It is, but I just wanted to give that
Yeah.
recognition.
Especially when they feel pressure to say, I'm okay with them coming home. Yeah. It happens a lot. And a lot of the victim is not going to go against the parents if the parents want the kid to come home.
Well, then also the victim is dealing with their own grief because they did love and care about this person. So there is a part of them that wants them to come home, but they think they're coming home healthy and this is never going to happen to me again.
Right.
That's what they've been told. They're gone. They're getting help.
Oh no. So like, what are the, and I know no one knows the statistics off the top of their head, but like, how often have you seen that the perpetrator was removed from the home, got the treatment, they had the safety plan in place, and then the poor survivor gets perped on again, thinking that it was gonna be okay? Like, I mean, we put all these measures in place to help these kids to make sure it doesn't happen. I mean, does it happen a lot?
That's the part too, where you don't say that they're coming home and this is never going to happen. They're coming home and we're going to follow safety and protocol. And I love both of you and I want you to be safe. And if this person, your brother or sister, comes in your room and they're not supposed to, or they break a rule, this unconditional love of, it's okay to tell me because I need to know. And it's okay because we need to work this through as a family. And it's not one person's fault if, so it's all of these conversations.
And I think, and I don't know what you guys think, a part of me believes they just found another victim. They may not,
they
don't go back to that same victim because they've been caught. Yeah. They just kind of move on to another victim.
Or it's not sexual abuse anymore. It's physical and emotional abuse. They might not be in sexual abuse than their sibling anymore, but they are still abusing them in other ways.
And not only that, but our justice system says we can't prosecute somebody under a certain age, or our justice system says we can't prosecute somebody who has an IQ below blank. Well, then what message does that send?
Well, it goes back to what Tara and I's mentor told us years ago. You take a therapist and they move in with the family for 6 months and they model behaviors and they do family therapy and they do individual therapy, and the therapist is there living with them 6 months out of the year, and you teach them all these things and you leave. And we know that that's never going to happen, but she's.
It reminds me of the show. What was the nanny show where she would?
Yes,
go
the
nanny 911.
Mm-hmm. Yes, her name was Jo. She was from the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, because if a family's dysfunctional, they're not letting you know let you in on their dysfunction if they're trying to get their child home. Especially if it's financial reasons. This child gets a disability check. This child supports us in our home.
And I think the level, I think people need to understand when you say like dysfunction, like the level of dysfunction, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's stuff that happens in any household. It doesn't have to be like, oh, there's substance abuse, there's physical abuse, it could be the trauma of a divorce, the trauma of a move, trauma of
emotionally,
yes, it doesn't have to be like this huge dysfunction where I think people's mindset is like, oh, it's this dirty household where kids aren't taken care of and, nobody works or there's substance abuse. And I've worked with so many families who were upper middle class and this was occurring in their home, and it could be everyday dysfunction. It doesn't have to be like the massive, that people think of.
Emotional intelligence is a big
I have like very intelligent people and they just happen to marry somebody because that person was that good at grooming and they brought a perpetrator in their home and they're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I see this? Like I've never in my life. So it could be also, it's not a dysfunctional home, but that you brought groomed and you thought they were amazing.
And let's remind ourselves, we're talking about children. We're talking about individuals under the age of 18 whose brains are not even fully developed and won't be until they're in their 20s.
Yeah. And there are people who are attracted to children and they don't like being attracted to children. And they have nowhere to go. So there's a lot of things that needs to be changed to change this.
Did we hit up in the last?
Do we know the rates of sexual per other countries?
Oh, that's a good question. I was wondering how that was like in Europe, where things are way more expressed and talked about and accepted, and there is not like body shame. It is, your body is beautiful. Our bodies are meant to be pleasured, whether that's through food, touch, emotion. Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know, but I like that.
And I'm pretty sure we have more serial killers than most other countries.
There is statistics, but I've had some interaction with individuals in terms of discussions about what's culturally appropriate in Europe. And yes, owning the body is great and non-sexualizing. I'm still uncertain if families need to just constantly walk around nude. If you did, there would have to be some really good rules on where can we do that? Where can we not? Are we touching? Are we not touching? Are things viewed as the body is the body, or is there if you're walking around nude, but there are also a lot of sexualization and free will and encouragement to be sexually expressive, how do we make sure that it's healthy? So there's so many questions. I would love to know statistics in Europe.
Well, it's also important to remember that Europe is made up by a lot of different countries with a lot of different cultures. Western and Eastern Europe are very different as well. And where's the stereotype of the nude walking around at? Like, is that supposed to be France, or which country is that? Because I haven't heard that one. I've heard like that in the United States with like very hippie type, back in like the commune type era, but I haven't heard of that like for a specific country that's a stereotype.
Okay.
I have no idea.
The question would be, when I took these like 3 or 4 interactions and calls that I don't recall, I just remember it was from Europe. So me talking about when they are normalizing that's what happens. So that being, is that the subculture that they live in? Is it their family? Is it?
It's definitely an interesting question. I was just wondering if like you knew specifically where that was the stereotype.
But I tell you this though, this is in history, hundreds of years ago, because I don't know the exact dates of the Roman Empire. I really don't, but it's safe to say hundreds of years ago, right? When the Romans were like at the creme de la creme. There was very much within that culture, one of bathhouses, one of communal, all kinds of stuff. And, so that is true. But now I didn't live back then, obviously. I was born in 1975, but, I do know that from what I remember studying about the Roman Empire, and especially in art appreciation history class and things, you see that. So that was very much an open expression of culture. Now, I don't know, because
we need a fact checker.
I'm looking at World Atlas
for this podcast.
I'm looking at worldatlas.com, which I'm assuming it's like at the top of my search, and it's World Atlas. That's people used to make maps, right? Surely to goodness, sir. Number 1 country serial killers is the United States at 3,004. Number 2 is England at 166. 3,204 compared to 166 between 1 and 2, top 1 and 2. So maybe they're better at getting away with it. That could be it in other countries. That's scary.
Well, I think what is scary is, especially for serial killers, I think too, that is a lot, just my own personal opinion, a lot of the environment and the lack of that is missing from somebody's life. I really do.
I think it's fine too. Now, you watched the documentary on HBO, didn't you, Jennifer, about the brain scans and Crazy Not Insane?
Oh, yeah, I did. Yes.
Oh,
I don't remember. It's been a long time, but Yeah.
It was a lot about dissociation and DID and serial killers, and it was a lady scanning brains, and it was so interesting. And they proposed that a lot of these serial killers have DID, and that's a part that kills people.
Did they
Yeah.
mention anything about lead poisoning? Because like the reason we had such a huge spike in serial killers back in like the 60s, 70s era was because the lead in gas and lead paint and lead causes aggression.
I don't know if it said it on that show, but I've heard that before. Yeah. I've also heard fetal alcohol syndrome for people like Columbus, why he was so savage. But who knows?
That is, that's really interesting because in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's shot out of my brain at this moment, but there's an entire section of the city that has been poisoned by lead. So much so that anybody that lives in that zip code in that area, they have like free education, free all kinds of things because of the consistent and continual, to this day, still lead poisoning from pipes, from paint, from dirt in the air. And I will never forget that I was doing a nursing clinical rotation at one of the elementary schools in that area of Louisville. And it was a kindergarten class. It was May. So, school's getting ready to end, right? And in the nursing clinical, we had to do educating on healthy eating from my plate, which is bogus. But anyway, that was, 12 years ago. And so kindergarten class, getting ready to go into first grade, I was like, okay, who can name a fruit that is like red? And they couldn't answer that question. Who could name a vegetable that's yellow? And it was very quizzical. Like it was, to me, at a kindergarten level, appropriate to say apple or corn. One kid said a banana for a vegetable. And so I kind of removed myself and had one of my classmates take over. And I went to the teacher and I said, I am so sorry. I said, we were not given instructions that this was like a special needs classroom, right? And she looked at me, she goes, this is a regular kindergarten class. And I said, okay. And she goes, oh, you don't know too much about the history of this neighborhood, do you? And I said, nope, don't live here, in this neighborhood. And that's when she educated me about the lead poisoning and that these children have significant learning disabilities, neurological, all kinds of stuff. So to your question, it would be interesting if anybody went to neighborhoods and followed over the course of 20, 30 years to see what kinds of mental health or psychological issues came from that, because it's not just the children, but it's also the parents who are also being poisoned at the same time.
That's what just by happenstance, you went to this school. Who knows how many other communities there are like that across America?
But it's definitely interesting.
It's looking at the environmental factors from a micro, meso, and macro level. That's my social work words right there.
Right. That's right. That's first year social work right there, girl.
And it's also, I think, coming to the conclusion of, I think in our world, we want to make it very simple. We want to make it black and white. If you have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then I know that you're going to be X, Y, Z. Right? But that's not the way it works, because we also have people who come from horrendous traumatic backgrounds that grow up to be the most compassionate, kind, and loving people. So then that kind of gets me wondering, at what pivotal moments was there a consistent, kind, loving, compassionate caregiver or a safe, trusted adult, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a key.
Yeah. And the information that we've been taught in the past about parenting, some of it is incorrect. Crying it out. Everything I've read about that is incorrect now. And how many kids were damaged from that? I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
we don't know what we don't know until we know something different. I was just having that conversation today with a client in just regards to understanding about the nervous system and polyvagal theory. You all know I love that. I didn't even know polyvagal theory existed until 3 years ago. It's been around since the 90s. I had no clue. So I didn't know what I didn't know till I know.
That's what I tell parents whose kids have been sexually abused, because they're like, how didn't I know? You only know with the present information that you saw in front of you. It wasn't happening right in front of you. You only know with what presently was being presented.
Yeah. And if a kid has been threatened, if they have had their animal threatened, their family members threatened, then that's a survival. It's like, I don't want my dog to be killed, or my cat, or my pet skunk, or my parrot, or I don't want anything to happen to my mom or my dad or my little sister or brother, or, so kids don't speak up for lots of reasons.
So how do we expect perpetrators or not perpetrators, children who sexually act out to tell?
I think it's one of those things that probably gets caught more than not, like an adult seeing, hearing, or yeah.
Yeah.
And I bet you there have been cases where maybe a juvenile has went to somebody they trusted and talked about those things. But like I said, then they're not going around talking about it. So it'd be very interesting if somebody, to hear a story like that, to hear how that process went and what made that person comfortable in sharing.
Well, yeah, because if you share that kind of information, that's opening up a Pandora's box. Because then there's always, the duty to warn, duty to tell, yeah. Man, lots of questions upon questions. This leads us to other questions.
It really does. My brain's a turning. I do have a lot more questions, but I think I want to ask if anyone has anything that would be good to wrap up, like any final thoughts, anything that you want the world to know about raising children in our world today and helping them not become sexual offenders or speak out if they see something or something happens to them.
I feel like, if at all possible, if you're planning to have a kid or you are now pregnant, either way, planning or not, as soon as you become pregnant, if you haven't been to therapy, if you haven't worked on your stuff that you need to heal, a kid is going to trigger every bit of that. And sometimes that means that the child, you're putting your emotions on the child and the child's emotions get ignored. So definitely therapy for the parent, because at that point when you have a kid, your feelings are no longer the most important. Your kids are, and you've got to figure that out. That's my input on that one.
Making sure that there's dialogue about appropriate sexual education, your body, supervision of time with your children, being informed of what's going on at other places, asking questions. So we have a right to know, is there an adult going to be there? Do you allow your kids to do X, Y, Z? It's not like my parenting is more superior than someone else's. These are questions I want to know so that I can help decide if it's okay if my kiddo goes over there. Or maybe I need to go over some safety precautions with them. So, and then when we talk about electronics, making sure that there's parent controls, knowing more than your child, which is going to be an ongoing battle for individuals because kids will inherently seem to always know more about us. As I get older, I'll just speak for myself, and knowing how can you monitor or making sure that they're watching appropriate things for their brain development. And then once again, even though we've said it 20 million times, open discussions about sexual education, open dialogues about who you can go to. Well, you don't have to engage in conversation with me, but I'm going to ask you to listen or even act like you're listening, because then you're going to absorb it, the things that I'm saying. If you don't feel safe asking me questions, let's find somebody you do feel safe with. Let's find somebody that you can't ask those questions with. I'm cool.
Yeah. And I would say, as a parent, learning how to control your emotional reaction, which can be hard because that's your child and you have an emotional connection and you go into like full blown parent mode. And I'm a parent. I've done that where my kid has came to me and I've had to like stone face, like have this conversation and then later either call somebody or like go somewhere and be like, what the fuck just happened? Like I had to shut that emotion off as they're asking and inquiring and then answer and then later be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just had to have that conversation. Like, because it's hard. But if you have a response in that moment, and that's what I tell myself, if I have like this huge emotional response, they're not coming back. They're
going to find out that information for somewhere else that may not be fully informed and correct.
Yes, they are going back somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
I like all of that. And what I'm about ready to say is coming from a person who does not have children. Okay, so just understand I own that. But I think taking away these things, computers, tablets, things getting put up at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, passwords being controlled by adults in the home, not by kids knowing passwords. I think that makes a huge difference. And I think encouraging creativity, encouraging connection, getting out into nature, going to the playground, swinging, planting, gardening, learning, going to the zoo, doing all those kinds of things that require a lot of, I'll be honest, energy, a lot of being present minded instead of disassociating. This is disassociation. I think that makes a huge difference because when you build that connection, when you build that trust, you build safety. So that opens up the opportunities for conversations that are really hard to have. But I don't have children.
That's a healed parent doing those things. I will say that for sure.
I don't have kids either, but all of these conversations just stress me out and make me think I'm not, I don't want them. That emotional, like, Tara, I've never even thought about how your emotional reactions would make your kids shut down. Like, you can't be emotional. That's too much, man. I need more therapy before I'm ready for that.
Hey, look at that. Beautiful. That's a recognition, right? I mean,
you're already a good parent.
Yeah, you're a best chicken mama ever.
Thank you.
But if we also applied that, but just not about children, but what if we applied that thought about before we get into romantic relationships? Right? Like, whoa.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
That's probably, that comes first for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Great conversation, ladies. Really good.
Yeah. Self-love and healing. It's important. Thank you guys so much for coming out and talking to us for part 2. I think we got a little deeper this time and spread a lot of knowledge. I definitely learned a lot, and I know I have more questions. So many questions. This could go on for 5 hours, but I'm glad to be here doing the work and keeping learning. And I hope everyone in podcast land continues listening to learn more.
That's right. We want to say thank you for all of our listeners out there, whether you're in Wisconsin, India, Thailand, or Ireland. Thanks for tuning in. And you can change the world tomorrow just by listening today. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Well, we've made it to the end of our episode. We want to thank you for listening. We hope you'll take something you heard today and use it to change the world tomorrow. We wanted to thank our music producer, Seth Hedges, from Uriah Wild Media. His website is in the show description. Also, a big shout out to Rodney Newton, our technical advisor.
See you next time. This project was supported by grant number VOCA 2020 Green River 26, awarded through the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet by the U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this program are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Kentucky Justice and Public Safety Cabinet or the U.S. Department of Justice. Thank you.